In this video, we will start to talk about the issues surrounding right semantics. So far we've defined registrable legal rights as follows. So a right describes the nature of the things that parties, people, can do. And then a real right describes the nature of things that parties, people can do with property. And that property can either be movable, i.e. possessions such as clothes, cars, keys, televisions, anything you generally want, or immovable. And immovable property legally refers to land. So a real right in land describes the nature of things that parties, people can do with land, i.e. with legally immovable property. And it's a registration of these real rights in land which is of interest to a land register. So a real right in land can represent ownership rights or non-ownership rights, as we've already detailed in our dartboard of rights. A benefiting party holds a real right in land. Encumbered land is land where a third party, i.e. someone who is not the owner, has a benefit. And encumbrances represents a spatio-right relationship between an owner of land and a third party. So we're seeing these party right and land relationships coming together in quite sophisticated ways. Responsibilities are an encumbrance, i.e. they have this spatio-right relationship between an owner and a third party. So responsibilities are an encumbrance where the owner must allow the third party to enjoy the right in land. And this may include duties on the owner to do something so that the third party can fully enjoy their right. Now that might be to clean ditches, to maintain walls, and other such activities. Restrictions are an encumbrance where the owner can no longer enjoy the right, and the owner must allow the third party to enjoy that right in land. However, this kind of third party enjoyment is unlikely because that right holder will normally also be restricted. But key here is that the right holder also has that power to remove the restriction because they hold that right. Also, third parties who benefit from an encumbering real right in land can be of two forms. They can be predial, that is, the right is granted to the party in their capacity as owner of land, and so when the land is sold, the right travels with the land. So in essence, the party that's engaged in that relationship is land, so a cadastral unit can be modelled to hold that right. Or it can be personal. The right is granted to the party in a personal capacity. So when the land is sold, the right remains with the original party. So what we've done here is we've created this abstraction of reality that supports our view of the world. So why have we done this? Well, as this view becomes more formalised and is agreed within the community, we can start to kind of model it more effectively, add in, for example, first order logic. And at this stage it starts to become an ontology, and so I'll go back to Gruber's classic 93 definition, which is an ontology is a formal, explicit specification of a shared conceptualization. So if it's explicit and a shared conceptualization, that supports implementation and adoption. It creates a language, a common language through which all parties can start to frame their conceptualizations of the world. And the first order logic element supports automated reasoning, which in turn improves registration and indexing. So is this conceptualization shared? Well, let's have a look at the land registrars. Now, LINs in New Zealand state the following. Interest in relation to land can be categorized as identifying things you can do, rights, things that you can't do, restrictions, and things that you have to do, responsibilities. Okay, that broadly supports the previous definition, and so we can model against that in a rights-based view. We can also look at that in something that's a little bit more broader in terms of the LADM, ISO 19152. But LADM is a general model that embraces informal and formal land rights, and this goes beyond the remit of land registration. So as we can see here, land registrars and land registration is just a small component of the scope of rights representations included by the LADM. So let's have a look at LADM and rights, responsibilities and restrictions, their verbal definition. So a right is a formal or informal entitlement to own or do something. That aligns pretty well. A responsibility is a formal or informal obligation on a landowner to allow or do something. Equally, that seems pretty aligned. And a restriction is a formal or informal obligation on the landowner to refrain from doing something. Again, that all seems kind of reasonably fine. So we seem to have, at least at a textual degree, an alignment. How about let's now let's look at this from a point of view of universal modelling language. So in the UML, rights, restrictions and responsibilities were all part of the same class. So here we are. RRR. Rights, responsibilities and restrictions. There's no relationship between rights, responsibilities and restrictions here that are articulated within the UML itself. Now clearly in what we've talked about there is a specific relationship between responsibilities and restrictions in terms of rights, and I have been arguing for all of the way through here that in terms of the land registration model that I've put together is that responsibilities and restrictions are party right land relationships, and so it's rights relationships with parties and land, and that's what creates a responsibility, a restriction, that kind of positive and negative side of a relationships. So we're not completely in alignment there. Now, do we have an issue? I would argue not. I would argue not for the following reasons. First one being that LADM is a general model and does not prescribe how a jurisdiction or country profile is derived, and that perfect knowledge in the real rights in land ecosystem does not exist. So I'll unpick those both in detail briefly. So LADM is a general model and does not prescribe how a jurisdiction or country profile is derived. As a general model, the LADM should allow different jurisdictions to model the same concept using different tooling, i.e. if the LADM describes multiple ways of actually modelling something, you can plug it together in whatever way suits you. So you can solve the same problem using different approaches within the modelling package. So we've shown that a jurisdiction, using the components within the LADM, a jurisdiction can model responsibility in at least two ways. That is directly as a responsibility against the landowner, so using the responsibility element of the RRR component, or indirectly as a real right in land from which a responsibility against the landowner can be inferred. Now, the model allows both approaches to be used, which is great. That means the model is flexible. And the choice here isn't necessarily about the model per se, it's about the practicalities and the legislative processes that occur within the jurisdiction in which this is operating. The other element was about perfect knowledge in the real rights in land ecosystem. Now, real rights in land within a jurisdiction will be maintained by different agencies. You'll have your formal agencies, the registrar, the land management, the policy elements, and the informal the informal rights which are held within a complex social network. Now, underpinning this is a concept that you're operating within a spatially enabled society. So the domains and the data within those domains will be spatially indexed and cross-referenced. So you can see the implication of those rights which are held and managed by different organisations by their spatial indexing and their spatial relationship. However, there's unlikely, at least in the short to medium term, going to be perfect knowledge between those domains. This means the language in each of these domains will be bespoke. There's highly unlikely to be any bridging ontology between the domains. Equally, the party right and land relationships can be written in both positive and negative terms, both within and between the domains. This means that the party right and land relationships can be framed in terms of, the party, the right or the land in a positive or negative way. So it's very easy to actually flip and infer different things about the rights just depending on how it's been written. And this impacts on how rights can be cross-referenced. It's not so much a problem in a manual or a human readable view, but it's definitely a problem in a machine readable point of view. So What we'll do in the next set of videos is start to ground some of these concepts in legal theory. And some of the ambiguities have been seen as an issue. This is outlined by Schlag in 2015. But we'll specifically start to look at these in terms of this kind of bundle of rights or bundle of sticks model of land, and then the form of rights and the implications of what a right holds. And that's the Hofeld analytical system. Okay, thank you very much.